added new configuration options, so people can configure it every way they want to now. And now it has more or less settled down in a way, I think. And so what I would suggest now, the next step should be there is to fix the performance of filtering software so we can go back to the original concept and actually do the checking here in, where is it, at this point, and do not have to do this fake after queue filtering. What is particularly concerning here is that even a lot of software still operates in this mode down here, that they send rejection messages to the fake sender addresses. And this is not only commercial software which are clueless or just reacting to marketing demands. Even popular open source software like Amavis is still configured by default to send rejection messages as of a couple of weeks ago. And that's a scandal in my mind. So you know how to do this, but configure your software correctly. Gray listing. Gray listing is actually nice, but there's problems with that too. How gray listing works is if you install a gray listing mechanism on your mail server, then the mail server sends to all new emails, sends a temporary error on first contact, which would be a 400 type of error code. And then a normal SMTP client is instructed to try again later, and that's usually in about 15 minutes or so. But spamming software, especially these virus-born zombie spamming software, does not do that, so that email is just lost, which is what you want. And that turns out to be extremely effective. In some installations we manage, we've seen just the email volume drop by 80% just because of that. And I've seen other reports of other people, approximately those same numbers. When I first heard about gray listing about 2.5 years ago, I thought, well, this is nice, but in about 3 months, spammers are going to fix their software, and this is all going to be over. But for some reason, they have not. I don't know any spammers, so I don't know why they did that. I can only imagine that this is not a problem for them. So gray listing is not used as much as one would like, but the problems with gray listing are many. As I said, the concept is sound in a way, even though you're abusing the protocol in a way, it's still correct. You're still dealing with the protocol correctly with the letter of the standard. But there are a lot of configuration problems that you might encounter. The first problem that we encountered about 2.5 years ago is that most of gray listing software is just really poorly implemented. When the concept came out, the concept is really simple, and you can implement that in about a couple of hours, I guess. But getting it right with all the corner cases is a problem. And everybody wanted to have the gray listing implementation out in a few weeks, I suppose, and they were just full of security problems, buffer overflows, SQL injection, and everything you've seen. And most of those were just 2 or 3 files of C code, and if you find about 3 or 4 security exploits in each file, that's a problem. The other thing, they don't scale particularly well, and really, if you consider gray listing, really check out what software you're using, because a lot of it is just really bad. If you have if you're a large organization, you probably have some kind of server pools or clusters or something of that sort, either on the sender or on the recipient side, and those cause problems. If you have a sender pool, if you have a server pool on the sender side, as many large ISPs, for example, AOL is the canonical example for that, they have that. Then on the remail attempt, on the second attempt to send the email, you have probably a different source IP address, and then the host would get gray listed again. So what you do here is usually that you do not, in your gray listing database, you do not enter the IP address, but that you enter maybe the class C network of the whole sender IP address. And you have to keep a list of for which networks you have to do that. It's a manual hassle. On the recipient side, you have the inverse problem. If on the remail attempt your connection goes to a different node in your server pool, then that server might not know that the email already got there 15 minutes earlier. So what you have to do there is either you could imagine that you do a kind of, you do not do a round robin or load balancing in the strict sense, but you decide which node to go through based on the source IP address. That might work, but it doesn't work if you have a server pool on the sender side. So what you have to do is you sort of have to share your gray listing database between all those nodes, which is of course a scalability problem. Then there's broken MTAs which just do not retry after a temporary error. There's the canonical example for that is the Yahoo groups site. And you might think you do not care about Yahoo groups, but maybe your users do. So, and there's more of that too. There's the other problem is related to that is mailing listing software, which has a new sender address on each sending attempt. They put some sort of numbers or some sort of code into the sender address. And you have to keep a list of sites that do that too. So you have now, well, these 4 different cases, and there's more, but those are the canonical cases in a way. You have to keep a whitelist or at least a list of sites that do that in order not to, so they can circumvent your gray listing implementation. And there's a list you can download of that from graylisting.org, but you would think that list would have stabilized. But if you look, they have a CBS there or an SVN maybe nowadays, and they keep committing into that with new entries every other day. So you really have to stay on top of these things. Another problem with gray listing is, in general, is time-critical emails. For example, the canonical example of that is the eBay emails that your auction is or your bid is about to expire or what have you. And well, what you could do there is you could also whitelist email from eBay, but then of course 50% of all spam probably fake sender addresses with the eBay domain. So that really would not work well. So if you have time-critical emails with eBay or some other large site, I guess you can't really use gray listing. Another, well, rarer problem is multi-stage relays. If you just have a series of servers that your email goes through, of course, you should not gray list in each one of them. That is just something you have to consider also in the configuration. So what I think, well, if on your private server or on your small group, maybe gray listing works, or if you have if you manage a server of a company, and you know all people only use email for company purposes, and they don't use eBay at work. Maybe gray listing is appropriate, but just for general ISP, or if you have a diverse user population which have different needs, I think gray listing just can't be used reasonably. Which is unfortunate, but do be careful if you consider gray listing. The latest but one idea to fight spam is SPF, which is used to stand for Sender Permitted From. Now it stands for Sender Policy Framework. And the way this works is the owner of a domain can control which mail servers you can use for email. As it stands now, you can send email through any mail server you want to, subject to authentication or relaying checks. But now the owner of a domain, the one who registers the domain, can publish a so-called SPF record, again via the domain name system, for lack of a better alternative. And that record lists all the valid servers that you are allowed to send outgoing mail through for this domain. And then under the theory, every recipient of email checks for SPF records of the sender address. And under the strict theory, would then reject email that comes from senders, from hosts that are not valid outgoing mail servers for that domain. And a lot of sites actually do hard rejections based on that. Then there's actually 2 alternatives or 2 sort of separate implementations of this idea. The original SPF checks the envelope sender address. There is the alternative sender ID, which is championed by Microsoft, which has a different internal record format too. They do not check the sender envelope address, they check the email content, so they would check all these different lines, sender, from, and all these things, and would kind of try to guess which is the most likely sender address. Those are 2 different ways to go about that. Sender ID has the problem that there's also patent problems and licensing problems from Microsoft, so it's not used all that much outside of Microsoft. But they're sort of the same idea. The problem with SPF, it doesn't fight any spam at all. Because if you're a spammer, then you would just use a different domain. If you have as a spammer, you have a list of email addresses or domains that you might like to use in your sender email address scheme. And then for spammer, it's trivial to just, before using a domain, check if there's an SPF record, and if there is, just don't use it. So that's fully automated, and I suppose spammers do that, so that's just a total waste of time then. Of course, spammers can also publish their own SPF records, and they do that. They register their own domains for the purpose of what they selling their products, and they can publish SPF records for their own domain, hosting their shops. So there's absolutely nothing that SPF, if spammers are not completely stupid and send spam using domains that have SPF records, if they're not that stupid, then SPF does not do anything at all against spam. If you go to the SPF website, which is openspf.org nowadays, you will see what they actually say is SPF is a sender policy framework to prevent email forgery. So they actually, if you read between the lines, they know it doesn't fight spam, it only prevents email forgery. And it actually does that in a way, but you might think SPF does something against phishing, but if you think about it, the envelope address, nobody ever sees the envelope address. In your email client, you don't see the envelope address, so it does not do anything that the user can notice. There's no noticeable difference for the user whether the email sender address of the email was forged or not. So that's also pretty useless. Sender ID is better in that regard. I don't have any practical experience with sender ID, but it would seem to be a better approach to actually fight this phishing problem. What SPF does prevent in a way is the following. If you're an ISP and you have a domain, and for large ISPs, the domain is often abused for email forgery attacks, so AOL and all these kinds of things. You have sender addresses with AOL, which are faked. And by publishing an SPF record, the ISP can sort of prevent that people do that. So if you publish an SPF record, and if you're a spammer and you follow that advice up there, then people would use a different domain. So you kind of protect your own domain against being abused by for faking email address schemes. And that is really the only thing that it does. And I suppose that's the reason why these large ISPs publish SPF records, all of them together, because it kind of protects the integrity or the reputation of their domain. But it does not do anything at all against the actual phishing problem or virus or sending spam. On the other hand, what it does is it breaks the conventional email protocols in various ways. For example, it breaks forwarding. Forwarding meaning something like your .forward file that you forward from your own one Unix account maybe to a different email address, or from your .procmail RC configuration or any other kind of forwarding scheme like that. Because then your own, this host that you forward from would probably no longer be an authorized sending email host in that domain, unless you can convince your large ISP to add your own personal machine into the SPF records, which is not likely to happen. And there is supposed to be a way around that, the sender rewriting scheme, which nobody has implemented so far. There's patches out there for all the different MTAs, but it's not available really. So it basically just breaks forwarding right now. What ISPs can now do is they can control which way people send email. Until now, you could pick any email server you want to for sending your email, but now if you use the domain of your ISP, if you have some sort of username at, I don't know, T-Online or whatever email address, the ISP can now say you have to send your email through this mail server that we like and we put there. And that is a problem, that could be a problem for you for various reasons. For example, if that particular email server, through stupidity, is on a DNS black hole list, you have no way around that anymore now. Because if you send it a different route, then the sender might block it because you have SPF records. And they can also do other kinds of things. You can imagine they could put advertisements in the bottom of the email, which you can no longer prevent. They can Of course, they can record all your email traffic, and since a week ago, we know that they will record all your email traffic, so you have no way around that anymore. You cannot install your own email